So it's Friday, and we've made it through another week. And I just wanted to share with you some words of encouragement from Matthew chapter 10. There, Jesus was having a conversation with his disciples, and the whole context of that conversation was surrounding the idea of fear. That is what a lot of us are feeling today, considering that we're going through still a pandemic that it seems very hard to beat. Governor Whitmer extended her stay-at-home mandate until the end of this month, until April 30th. Now, we're still dealing with this and we're still having the challenges, and there's still, this doesn't relieve the tension that we may be feeling in our hearts. This doesn't relieve the fear that we may be experiencing, considering that, well, if we're going to be staying at home, what's going to happen with work? What's going to happen with the kids? Our text is Matthew 10:29, and there Jesus asked a question. He says, "Are not two sparrows sold for a copper coin? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will." It's interesting that even in the middle of all of these things that are happening, that God is somehow still interested in us. Here's why I believe that. If you are back in Jerusalem, you would experience something very peculiar. As you walk down those dusty streets and make your way to the temple, you would find people bartering, selling many things. Among those things that they would sell would be ox, goats, sheep, all for the purpose of offerings in the temple. But there were some who could not afford the more expensive offerings, and so some would buy birds. And among the birds that some would buy would be sparrows. They're fairly cheap. 2 sparrows for 1 copper coin. In the book of Luke, we learn that 5 sparrows were sold for 2 copper coins. The people that would often utilize sparrows were lepers. The Bible tells us in Leviticus 14 and verse 4 that lepers, in order to experience cleansing, a ceremonial cleansing, they would have to offer birds in the sanctuary. And so they were used to utilizing sparrows. Sparrows were not just for those who were poor, they were also for the despised. And so those who were despised would use the birds that were despised. And for Jews, sparrows were despised. They were just cheap birds to throw around. They were a nuisance in some sense, in some cases, but not to God. For Jesus reminds us here in this text that even though they might be sold for 1 coin, even though 2 might be thrown in for 1 coin, not one of them fall to the ground without God taking notice. What that means is, no matter how we may regard the birds, God considers them important so much that they have His notice, that His will is involved in their lives. I imagine that sparrows never get fed without God providing. Sparrows would never fall from the sky without God taking notice the exact place that they fall. God cares for the birds. He does. And Jesus in verse 31 utilizes that illustration and says this: "Therefore, do not fear, for you are worth more than many sparrows." You are worth so much to Him that no matter what you're experiencing, no matter what you're feeling on the inside, no matter how afraid you may be, you are of so much value that He'll take good care of you. And so there's no reason to fear. There's no reason to be afraid, because we have our God who pays attention to sparrows and pays attention to us who are more valuable.